Hey everybody, sorry I'm late. God, you wouldn't believe how much can go wrong in the span of a single week. I'm your substitute teacher today. My name is Mr. Ramsey. Ooh, substitute teacher. You know what that means? Yeah, we're gonna slack off. Hang on a second. What are you all doing here? We're students. This is our writing class. Do you all seriously not recognize me?
We don't trust this as anyone that looks like a hobbit is.
Okay, but I look nothing like a hobbit.
That's exactly what a hobbit would say!
This is insane. Tony, you recognize me, right? Whoa! Don't drag me into this! I'm just here for the drama. David, what about you? Aren't you a little too old to be in school?
One is never too old to learn new things.
Ugh, that's a good answer. Okay, fine. We'll roll with it. Today we're going to be talking about being vulnerable in your writing. What are you talking about? This is a math class! Wait, didn't you say it was right? Man, I don't know anything about math. Ha! This is hilarious! He's so out of his element. Yeah, let's all point and laugh at him. Wow, okay, I really don't like this. Well, Mr. Writer, now you know how it feels. Fenton, what are you doing here? I developed this elaborate ruse this week to give you a taste of your own medicine. How exactly? I put you in a world where everyone has forgotten you, and you're completely out of your element. It's not fun, is it? Okay, yes, I guess you did. I'm assuming this is payback for what I did to you in Order of the Pawn? Indeed. But I will hand it to you, this week's chapter was quite good. Look, Fenton, I don't want to fight like this anymore. Let me just tell you what happens next in the series. Come here. Wait, you're serious? That's been your plan this whole time? Yeah, I just wanted it to be a surprise. Huh, well then, I dare say I should have had more faith in you. Everyone, you can drop the act now. Who are you? Where am I? Oh dear, I think that memory potion I gave them may have been too strong. Wait a second, how did I get here? What is this place? Uh-oh, seems like everyone's having an existential crisis. Right, well, you should get on with your Saved as Draft podcast while I handle this. Oh, and get that other Order of the Pawn chapter out sooner rather than later. I don't like cliffhangers. Will do, Fenton. So, you and I, we're good then? Yes, Bradley, we're good. Now go, off, record your podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 51 of the Saved as Draft podcast. We're just over a week into 2026, and things have been crazy to say the least. Big changes happening at my day job have had a ripple effect on all my other projects this week in my free time, which of course led me to delaying the Order of the Pawn chapter this week by a few days. And now, of course, the podcast is a few hours late as well. The dust is finally settling, though, so I'm hoping for a smoother week going forward into 2026, but we shall see. In the meantime, hello, and thank you for being here. I've got a great episode for you all, but first, let's start with our weekly community spotlight. This week, I want to shout out my friend and fellow Audio Mazes author, J. Allen Winchester, or Jaden, as I know him. Jaden is one of those authors who has an incredibly expansive imagination. If you've heard my interview with him from a few weeks ago, you know what I mean. This is someone who lives and breathes the world he creates, and it's so inspiring to see. Jaden's been on Substack for a little while now, but he recently launched paid tiers to support some of the projects he has in motion, and he's been diving into the world of podcasting as well. In particular, he's relaunching his Hearth of a Writer series where he narrates his own work. The relaunch will feature episodes where he narrates chapters from Eclipse: The Beginning, which was his first manuscript. Jaden has a great reading voice and tone that he employs during his narration, so if you're a podcast fiend like me, you should absolutely check out what he's got going on. Thank you to Jaden for being an amazing part of this community, and be sure to check out his work when you get a chance. I'll tag him in the show notes so you can take a look at all the stuff he's doing. All right, and for this week's episode of the podcast, we're going to start with our weekly shoutouts, then we'll take a look at the Wandering Prompt stories from last week. After that, I'll dive into stories from this past week's Power Up prompt with help from a master of cosmic horror, Connor Mancuso. From there, we'll dive into our weekly writing discussion about vulnerability in our work, and then it'll be time for this week's featured guest interview. I'm sitting down with A.M. Bowman this week to talk about his recent relaunch and his brand new nonfiction publication. So look forward to that later in the episode. And that's it for housekeeping this week. Let's dive into this week's shoutouts right after a quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode of the Saved as Draft podcast is sponsored by Shameless Suds. Oh, jeez. Oh, man. This is bad. Whoa, hey. What's wrong? Why do you have blood on your hands? I just killed a character in one of my stories, and now I need to hide the evidence. Won't everyone know it's you when they read it? That's not the point. Listen, I need your help. I've tried washing my hands, but this blood won't come off, or maybe it's ink. I don't know. This whole metaphorical murder stuff is really confusing. Okay, first of all, take a deep breath. You just need to use Shameless Suds. Shameless Suds? What the heck is that? Shameless Suds are a new line of hand soaps for writers that let you wash your hands of that pesky shame and guilt that comes from the darker side of our work. Oh, wow, that's amazing. So you literally get to wash your hands of the whole thing. That's right. It works for all kinds of writing guilt as well. And I do mean everything. Okay. Well, right now, I just need to cover up this character that I killed off. Not a problem. Here you go. Wash for 30 seconds and rinse with warm water. Oh, great. And does it have to be warm water? The heat here is a little finicky, so it might be cold only... Not cold! I mean, just... find some warm water, okay, champ? Cold water won't work. Okay then, thanks for the help. Oh wow, is that lavender I smell? Wait, does that mean you just used Shameless Suds yourself? What the heck did you write? Don't worry about it. Alright, well, thanks again. Feeling guilty about your fictional sins? Try Shameless Suds today, and leave the emotional turmoil for your readers to deal with. Now available in lavender, jasmine, and fresh laundry scents. All right, and we're back. Every Tuesday, I open up a thread in my subscriber chat for links to all of your latest work. I select 5 at random to feature here on the show, and so let's dive right in and see what stories we got for this week. First up is I Was a Man Once, Love by Possum Kingdom. So, I've featured pieces from this series before on the show here, but I was super excited to have the opportunity to check out this new entry. In this series, the author takes us through a conversation between a character called the Recaller and a countless number of figures who interrogate them about aspects of being human. It's exceptional, and the framing narrative here gives way to truly profound poems that always hit home for me. With this one, we're talking about love, of course, and as with other poems in this series, the philosophical impact of this piece cannot be understated. It captures love as a concept on a cosmic scale, offering unique perspectives and beautiful ruminations on how powerful and fleeting it can be. It only takes a few minutes to read this entry, and it works on its own, but I promise it will stick with you for days after you've read it. Here's an excerpt. To know infinity is only to begin to learn of love, but I shall not speak of it much further, for it is the one force that escapes omnipotence, and thus is first among equals, to be held sacred even by the gods. Amazing. Just such a good little excerpt there. Great series. Check it out when you get a chance. Link in the show notes. Our second shout out this week is Effigy by Pancake Sushi. And can I just say how much I love that handle? This here is another poem, and it's the first one I've read from this author, but it has incredible impact from the opening lines. It throws us right into a tense situation, highlighting pain and confusion as it continues to escalate. As the name suggests, it's told from the perspective of someone being tortured and burned as part of a ritual. It's very graphic, so keep that in mind, but it's also very captivating and flows effortlessly. It's a fantastic first impression of this writer. Here's an excerpt. Strung up and bound by the wrists, scourged and flayed for the sake of worship, they sang to me, danced ecstatically, and flogged themselves in my name, cooed at my infant image, expected my wrath at their enemies, prayed for salvation through me. Really good stuff. Check it out, link in the show notes. Our third shout out this week is Best Offer by M. Majerus. This is a truly unique story that combines elements of sci-fi and comedy to excellent effect. The original art done by the author is also a great way to open the piece. The premise here is that our protagonist has uploaded their consciousness to a digital afterlife, but they're stuck in a virtual waiting room while their body is sold for parts to various buyers in the real world. It's a crazy concept, but right away it leads to a hilarious anecdote about how their ears in life were incredibly valuable apparently due to their massive size. The writing style here is great. It has this fun and conversational flow with just enough sarcasm to add personality without being overbearing. As a result, I felt very attached to the protagonist and the world. I was able to buy into the concept very easily. The way that it expands on the world building too, with additional anecdotes related to other body parts like the brain and heart, is also awesome. It's a story that leverages its structure to further immerse the reader into the setting, and it's all the better for it. A really fun and super unique read. Here's an excerpt. The cardiac organ, as the official designator labeled it, stood put when all the other anatomic spare parts flew off the shelves one by one. All the while I was flapping between lowering the price, rising it even more, or simply scrapping the sale altogether for the sake of leaving my heart as a memento for the grieving family. On a spur of the moment, I even went online shopping for an enclosure to encase it in. Not the cheap imitation plastic crap, just so you know, but one of those real, one-of-a-kind, artisanal masterpieces on Etsy. Thankfully, sound judgment prevailed, and I decided against encumbering my parents with a bulky paperweight they'd have no use for, but could not quite bring themselves to get rid of. What is a laminated heart floating in a glorified pickle jar good for anyway? It's ugly to look at, and it doesn't have any function outside a body it could pump blood for. Great stuff from that story this week. That was a fun one. Our fourth shout out this week is Sausage Fest by J.M. Gooding. And that's quite the title, I know, but this story probably has one of the most bonkers premises I've ever seen. The idea is that one day, all over the world, people start producing fully edible sausages directly from their mouths. They just pop out of them, all ready to be cooked. It starts as an internet sensation and then quickly balloons into a new way of life. Soon there are whole businesses and events surrounding these magical sausages. Never mind that they came from inside people, that's not the point. At the end, JM reveals that this idea came from an AI-generated Facebook reel where someone created a video of an elderly person firing sausages out of their mouth. Only a true creative could see something that crazy and then somehow one-up it and tell a whole story around it. But honestly, I really enjoyed this piece. And if I may say, I love how JM managed to outdo the AI here by telling this captivating tale with a wild concept at the center. It's an engaging read, partially because I was asking myself the entire time, what's going on with the sausages? But also, to be fair, JM really knows how to make a story feel real, even if the concept is utterly insane. Here's an excerpt. The people producing it were almost all elderly. Not exclusively, but enough that the association stuck. Late onset. Post-retirement. Theories circulated and burned out. Microplastics. Processed food. COVID vaccines. Cell phone radiation. No one proved anything. No one found a cure. Insurance codes appeared anyway. The next shift didn't happen in hospitals. It happened online, the way these things always do. Sideways and without permission. Someone stitched the original video with a frying pan. No music. No caption beyond a shrug emoji. The camera stayed fixed on the stovetop while a hand turned the sausage with a fork, cautious at first, then less so. It browned like anything else. When it was done, the person cut off a piece and set it on a paper towel. A boy leaned into frame, maybe 12. He chewed. He thought about it. Then he said it tasted normal. That was all it took. A seriously wild concept, but I love the execution. Great work from JM. Our final shout-out this week is The Call of Lazarus by Coral Evermore. This piece is a gothic fantasy tale of dark romance and forgotten memories. A note at the beginning of the post also explains how this story was the product of several ideas. It started as a response to a prompt, and then Coral adapted it to her monthly Evermore theme for November of 2025, which was, of course, Fall and Grace. The inspiration here is the classic story of Hades and Persephone, and there's shades of that in the story, but Coral's approach offers a really unique take on the concept. It feels familiar and fresh in equal measure. Honestly, all the stories this week have been really unique in that regard. The other thing I loved about this story is how Coral establishes incredible chemistry between our two characters almost immediately. The dialogue is sharp, it's packed with personality. It immediately brought the connection to the forefront between the two characters. As the story goes on, Coral's iconic imagery comes in to further solidify this connection. As many of you know, I was a ghostwriter for 5 years professionally, and in that time I was contracted to write a lot of romance novels. So, with that experience, I feel qualified to call out great romance when I see it. And this captures the excitement and passion that you would expect from a story like this. And not only that, but it also does it very quickly and it builds from there. Here's an excerpt from the beginning so you can see what I mean. As her eyelids fluttered open, she met his gaze. He was the most striking man she had ever seen. Long, raven hair fell perfectly over his eyes of shining silver. His skin, dark and gray. How do you know my name? She blinked, trying to rouse herself from a deep slumber. Who are you? Maeve realized that she'd been lying in a fairy circle. The dark-haired man smiled, almost imperceptibly. Don't you remember? You wanted this. I did? She tried to recall something, anything, but the memories were hazy, as though they belonged to someone else. Why could she not remember? Look around you, he said, sliding his elegant hand under Maeve's head of flaming curls. As he traveled down her back to lift her, she quivered from his touch. Notice in that scene how the story uses sensory descriptions and dialogue to highlight confusion, but also bring emotion into the scene. It's strange, but it's also very alluring. A nice balance there, right from the beginning. Great work from Coral. And that's it for this week's shoutouts. Thank you to everyone who submitted links. Stay tuned for the next podcast shoutouts thread on Tuesday for a chance to get your work featured on the show. Next, we'll take a look at the Wandering Prompt stories from last week, but actually, you know what? I've got something in my script here. Looks like there's another shoutout or something. Oh, wait, no, that's not a shoutout. That's... Wandering Prompt 8 0 1 0 9 2 6. Write a story or poem inspired by your favorite fairy tale. Similar, yet different. Told in your style. 1,000 words or less. First to submit wins. A second story will also be chosen. Good luck. Okay, I think we're back. Sorry about that, everyone. Apologies for the interruption, but we're back, and it's time for the Wandering Prompt Award Ceremony. Last week's Wandering Prompt asked for a story that leans into the concepts of liminal space and all the uncanniness that comes along with it. First, we'll start with a look at the runner-up story. This story was published second last week after our winner, and it was a close call. Our runner-up story this week is In a Single Moment by Verdant Butterfly. Now, I'm a huge fan of Verdant Butterfly's work, especially her poetry. It always flows incredibly well, packs in tons of atmosphere and beautiful imagery into perfectly composed stanzas. And that's absolutely the case here. But with this piece, she really took things to the next level with the liminal aspect of the prompt. The poem's structure is meant to be the space between two words, tick and talk. So it begins with tick, and then you get swept up into this roller coaster of words as you pass through the liminal space between those two moments. I love how the poem builds on its own momentum as well. You almost feel the need to read faster as it goes, because the language starts accelerating in terms of both its tone and size and rhythm. This piece is just as much an experience as it is a work of art. It's honestly hard to describe how it feels unless you read it yourself. That being said, here's a quick excerpt that illustrates how Verdant Butterfly uses structure and wording to convey liminal movement. Light spills faster now. Thoughts jostle for space, already packed for departure. Routes half-sketched, destinations pressing forward, before ideas settle into place. Momentum gathers. Windows lift in quick succession. Stairs rise, curve, multiply, leading upward, outward, onward. See how it really started to pick up at the end there? Awesome work from Verdant Butterfly. Great work for that Wandering Prompt this week. And now it's time to talk about our winning story from last week's Wandering Prompt. As with each week, the first story to pop up in the comments of the episode wins the grand prize, and in this case, the winning story showed up a few hours after I posted the episode. The competition for these Wandering Prompts continues to be very intense. All right, announcers, take it away. Tell us about the winner. The winner of Wandering Prompt 7 is What the Water Keeps by Connor Mancuso. This story about the horrors of liminal space combines the terror of things like the back rooms with Connor's classic style, and the two go together like peanut butter and chocolate. Yeah, or existential dread in liminal spaces. Yeah, that too. I agree with you both. This piece from Connor is an insanely cool and extremely punchy take on the horror of liminal spaces. It wastes no time in presenting us with an incredible sense of atmosphere. I love how Connor managed to capture that strange, uncanny feeling that liminal spaces give us. Yeah, kind of like how I feel every time I stay at a hotel. What kind of hotels are you staying at? He's right though. Think about how it feels when you leave your hotel room and the hallway's empty. You get this sense that something's not quite right. The repetition of the doors, the pattern of the carpets, it all feels wrong. Yeah, that's true. I love how Connor captured that, while also building a sense of dread that pays off with its chilling conclusion. I couldn't have said it better myself. I guess I did, but let's check out an extended excerpt before we go down an entirely different kind of existential rabbit hole. The ceiling stretched higher than expected, lights humming with the exhausted patience of systems never meant to rest. Their glow reflected across water that spread in every direction. Basins, channels, open chambers where shallow blue tile faded into deeper, lightless expanses. The water did not ripple when he moved. Jonah stood ankle-deep without remembering stepping in. His shoes were soaked, his cuffs heavy. The silence pressed in. Not absence, but restraint, broken only by distant dripping and the low, continuous hum of electricity feeding something vast. This was a place for waiting. He tried to count steps. The numbers dissolved. Time here was diluted, stretched thin, as if minutes had been poured into water and stirred until meaningless. He walked. Each footfall echoed down tiled corridors branching between bodies of water. Intimate basins tucked like forgotten spas, vast halls where liquid lay perfectly still, mirroring the ceiling lights in long, trembling lines that hurt to follow. Some reflections were wrong. In one chamber, the lights bent at impossible angles. In another, they appeared doubled, as if the water were folding space instead of reflecting it. Jonah crouched, peering closer, and felt a pressure bloom behind his eyes. Not pain, but attention. He pulled back. The place did not like to be examined. Insanely cool entries for this last week's Pondering prompt, and awesome work once again from Verdant Butterfly and Connor Mancuso. Remember, folks, the grand prize does go to the story that gets posted first, but I also select a runner-up, so if you like the sound of this week's prompt, be sure to post something anyway, regardless of if someone's won, because you still have a chance to be featured. Next up, let's take a look at this past week's Power Up Prompt Stories, right after a look at this week's Indie Release Radar. Hello and welcome to this week's Indie Release Radar, powered by BookStack. We've got 3 more releases to highlight this week from indie authors around the web. So Arnold, how are you? You doing good after that hangover from last week?
Oh, yeah, it's fine. I'm doing dry January.
Oh, good for you. That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm not drinking anything.
Oh, wait, you mean you're not drinking anything at all? That's not safe, bud. Your body needs water.
No, my body needs protein.
Arnold, dry January just means you don't drink alcohol. You can drink other stuff.
Wait, really?
Yeah, really.
Okay, well, I'm going to drink 17 gallons of water after we talk about this week's books.
Oddly specific, but okay, that sounds like a plan. First up this week, The Perfect Assist by Jillian Arley is a spicy single dad sports romance and the second book in the Green Bay Bobcats series. Nico Koshinen is captain of the Green Bay Bobcats and one of the most talented hockey players in the NHL. Sadie Wilson has been an outcast her entire life, with a passion for chakra stones and yoga. After being hired by the Bobcats, Sadie soon finds herself living as a stay-in nanny for Nico's daughter. In such close proximity, they share both wholesome moments and stolen touches in equal measure. Will they be able to let their insecurities go and let each other in? Find out when The Perfect Assist releases on January 8th. Second this week is When Death Gives You Lemons by Alice G. Brooks. This queer dark comedy with light fantasy elements explores themes of redemption, guilt, and forgiveness in a world filled with hope. Isaac Fry is many things: an animal enthusiast, gay, guilty of 3 murders, and most importantly, dead. Grimm is only one thing: tired of leading humans to the afterlife, day after day. When the recently deceased Isaac asks for a second chance to redeem himself, Grimm sees an opportunity to explore the realm of the living. As the two venture into Isaac's past, the truth of the murders comes to light and reveals the state of Isaac's redeemability. But what is that exactly? Find out soon when Death Gives You Lemons releases January 11th. And third this week is Sugar and Scars by Kalindi Cree. Sugar and Scars is a collection of poetry from author Kalindi Cree. It explores themes of heartbreak and hope through moving and stunning poems. If you're someone who enjoys real and authentic poetry that speaks to your heart and soul in equal measure, you won't want to miss this one. Pre-order your copy of Sugar and Scars today and get ready to dive into this poetry collection when it launches on January 12th. Thank you again to BookStack and Hazel Allen for helping us get the word out about these new indie author releases. You can find links to all these titles in the show notes. All right, Arnold, you can get your water now. Arnold, you there?
You know what would make this water even better? Protein!
Okay, you know what? I'm going to leave you to it. All right, and we're back. Before we dive into this week's Power Up Prompt stories, I wanted to share a couple of things from prior Power Up prompts, including a story submitted just recently for our folklore prompt that we did a few weeks ago. So, first up, I want to talk about a story for last week's Western-themed Power Up prompt. I was at fault here. I missed this link, and it was submitted in time, so I wanted to talk about it on today's episode. The story in question here is 34 Times She Came Back by Luna Astley Kolsu. This one's actually a cyberpunk western, which was one of the mashups I was hoping to see last week. In this story, a deputy escorts an outlaw to public execution in a neon pleasure district. Luna uses the genre here to incredible effect. The presence of advanced technology supports the core structure here, and the setup reminds me of one of my favorite Black Mirror episodes. I won't say which one because of spoilers, but if you're a Black Mirror fan and you read this story, trust me, it'll click. Luna's creativity is one of those things that always inspires me. Her stories always have brilliant concepts, and she realizes them with rich imagery and very well realized characters. The emotions here are as real as the words on the page, and I'm once again reminded why I love reading her work so much. So Luna, I'm sorry I missed this one last week, but I'm going to make it up to you with another shout out right about now. Let me explain. You see, Luna also recently posted a story for the Folklore Power-Up prompt that I did in partnership with J.M. Gooding a few weeks back. That story was called Alder Hollow, and I loved it. I sent it over to JM, and he graciously wrote up a full review since he did that for all the other folklore stories a few weeks ago. So, all that being said, here's what JM Gooding had to say about Luna's recent folklore story. You understood the assignment, and I love that. Folklore isn't always a creepy story. They're parables told to illustrate what happens when rules are broken. And quite often, these rules are meant to ensure survival. It explains how a community learned to live with fear by institutionalizing it. One of the things I'm impressed with across all the stories is that not a single person made the foolish child literally a stupid kid that exists to deliver hubris as a plot device. Mirabelle's foolishness comes from believing the rules don't apply to her because in a way, they don't. She cannot dream. The warning literally doesn't map to her experience. That's a sharp, empathetic interpretation of the prompt, and it avoids the trope of punishing curiosity for its own sake. Then, the fate that follows is inevitable, not malicious. Nothing chases Mirabelle, nothing tricks her. Something has been reaching for 14 years and finally gets answered. That distinction matters. The encounter feels like it's inevitable, not a jump scare. It's decisive because it was always waiting, not because it chose violence. And the consequences are uneven. The village isn't damned or redeemed, it's simply altered. That is folklore logic done right. And then, you went further than the prompt. You didn't just depict folklore, you showed how folklore mutates when the old story breaks and becomes something new. The story earns its own retelling inside the world. I love that, because something a lot of people miss is folklore is meant to be told orally, and that passage invites something very important: misinterpretation, misunderstanding, and misretellings. Overall, this story understands folklore as something born from damage, not imagination, and it lets the damage reshape the village instead of neatly resolving it. Great job. Amazing. Thank you to Luna and to J.M. Gooding for reviewing this latest story here. I know it can be difficult to write stories for these prompts in time each week, so I love to kind of take the opportunity to look at stories that came out later so that we can reward people for putting in the effort like this to publish something, even if it is a week or 2 weeks after the prompt originally came out. So, again, this was wonderful. Shout out to Luna. 2 amazing stories there, the Western cyberpunk and the folklore, and a phenomenal review from J.M. Gooding. Fantastic stuff. And that brings me to another story, actually, from last week's prompt. This one was posted just a few days after last week's podcast episode, so I, of course, told the author that I would include it in today's podcast. So, before we dive into our cosmic horror stories this week, let's talk about one other Western-themed story from last week called Quick Hand by Ed, the editor. With this piece, the author sought to channel Stephen King, and specifically King's story The Gunslinger, which I'm familiar with. And I absolutely got that vibe from this piece. I thought the writing style was incredibly engaging, and I loved the intensity of the shootout. The way the story plays with themes of identity and consequences of our actions fits well into the Western genre. I felt the lawlessness and the uncertainty of how things would play out, and it got me really invested in the story's events. Ed also let me know that narration is being recorded for this story, and he'll be adding that to the post soon. Be sure to check the link in the show notes and give that audio a listen. I can't wait to hear it myself. And Ed, my friend, if you're listening to this, you did a fantastic job emulating Stephen King's style. I believe he would be proud if he read this one, and I sincerely hope he does one day. All right, now that we're all caught up, this week's Power Up prompt was a combination of cosmic horror and dark fantasy. I teamed up with Connor Mancuso to make this prompt happen, and he provided me with 3 elements set in the universe of his upcoming novel, The Loom and the Maw. Connor also graciously wrote up some amazing reviews of the entries for this week's prompt. As of this recording, he's actually under the weather fighting bronchitis, but despite this, he still managed to review nearly all of the stories that people wrote for this week's Power Up prompt that he helped create. If that's not dedication, I don't know what is. If you submitted a story this week and you enjoy Connor's review that I'm about to read, be sure to thank him by checking out the Kickstarter that he just launched for his novel. Every little bit helps, and in the meantime, I think I speak for the whole community when I say that we all hope you get well soon, Connor. All right, so your elements this week for the Power Up prompt were a setting called the Woven Threshold. Your character was the bearer of the pattern, and your conflict was the cost of knowing. Let's dive in and see what everyone came up with. First up is Power Denied by Suparna Chakraborty. This poem leans hard into the idea that power is not a gift, but a burden distributed unevenly, and often without consent. Power Denied situates the woven threshold as a sacred structure that feeds on devotion and obedience, one that masquerades as protection while quietly consuming those who serve it. The bearer of the pattern here is not the priesthood, but the novice who notices the misalignment, the realization that something ancient and revered is sustained through sacrifice disguised as duty. What makes this piece resonate is how knowledge doesn't arrive as a revelation, but as refusal. The character doesn't conquer the pattern, he rejects it, and that rejection becomes its own kind of rupture. The cost is immediate and irrevocable. To deny the pattern is to unmake the structure that relies on it. This poem understands that in cosmic horror, resistance is not triumph, it's consequence. The power isn't destroyed, it's destabilized, and the world must absorb the shock. A sharp, mythic take on the prompt that honors its central truth. Some knowledge can only be survived by letting everything else burn. And that, of course, is Connor's review of Suparna's story. I wholeheartedly agree. This is a fantastic review, and I have to shout out the fact that Suparna, every week that she does Power Up prompt stories, really manages to pack a ton of great characterization and storytelling into a typically short form. She usually does poetry or flash fiction, in this case poetry. And I love when I can see a writer like that that is able to pack so much into a small space. It's not easy, as we all know. All right, next up is Containment by Marius Creed. And here's what Connor had to say about this one. Containment is a masterclass in restraint. It treats the woven threshold not as a spectacle, but as a subtle misbehavior of reality, something that doesn't announce itself, only hesitates. The basin at the heart of the story isn't dramatic or overtly hostile, it's attentive. And that attentiveness is what makes it dangerous. The narrator embodies the bearer of the pattern through observation rather than action. He learns, slowly, that attention itself is labor, That by noticing repetitions, cataloging deviations, he is participating in an exchange. Knowledge here is transactional. Every insight stabilizes the place while destabilizing the self. The cost of knowing arrives quietly. Memory becomes negotiable. Identity becomes removable. And leaving requires subtraction. Not violence, not punishment, just loss. This story fits the prompt with surgical precision. It understands that the threshold doesn't trap you, it offers balance. And balance, once accepted, is very hard to walk away from unchanged. Amazing, amazing. And I have to agree, Marius absolutely understood the assignment here. This story is textbook cosmic horror in the best way possible. It fits nicely into the genre while also showcasing that restraint that Connor mentioned, allowing us to interpret and allowing our minds to kind of fill in the gaps of the unknown, which is, of course, where the fear of cosmic horror comes from. Great work. Next up is A Clean Start by Gregory Blair. What makes A Clean Start so effective is how casually it introduces the pattern into the most mundane of spaces. The threshold doesn't appear as ruin or temple here, it manifests in grout lines and steam, in the private vulnerability of an ordinary ritual. The protagonist becomes a bearer of the pattern almost by accident, not because he seeks forbidden knowledge, but because he's tired enough to stop questioning the impossible when it appears. The truth he encounters is overwhelming, cosmic, and deeply destabilizing, but the real cost isn't the vision itself, it's acceptance. Rather than carrying the knowledge forward or attempting to master it, the character chooses integration. He allows the experience to reframe his relationship with uncertainty, fear, and meaning. The horror lingers not in what he saw, but in what he now chooses not to know, and the price he quietly pays in recurring nightmares. This is cosmic horror at the level of feeling, exactly as the prompt invites. Not answers, not lore, just the unsettling realization that clarity is not always a mercy. Couldn't have said it better myself. That was Connor's review, of course, and I have to agree with all the points there. This is exactly what the prompt invited, and I loved how we came to the realizations here and how it changed the character. Fantastic stuff. Next up, we have Cloudy-Eyed Curse by Mina Howell. Cloudy-Eyed Curse explores the most dangerous interpretation of the pattern, certainty. Reverend Liana doesn't stumble into the threshold. She believes she has been chosen by it. Her visions give her purpose, authority, and a narrative she can impose on others. Here, the bearer of the pattern is someone who mistakes proximity for righteousness. The knowledge she gains doesn't transform her quietly, it radicalizes her. The more she learns, the more she disconnects from her own humanity and pulls others with her. The cost of knowing in this story is collective. The flock trades autonomy for protection, humanity for survival. And when the pattern withdraws its favor, it does so without explanation or apology. The visions stop. The certainty collapses. What remains is faith without guidance and a future stripped of foresight. This piece captures a vital truth of the shared universe. The pattern does not care how it is interpreted. It only responds to attention, and those who claim to speak for it are often the first to be consumed by its silence. That's a phenomenally well-written review from Connor there. And yes, I think this calls out all of the amazing strengths of this story from Mina. And once again, it's proof positive that Mina really knows how to instill fear through incredibly detailed, believable characters. And I love how in this story she practiced what happens when the setting and the events transform the characters through their shared experiences. Fantastic work and a great review from Connor. Next up, we have The Pedagogue of Recurring Hours by Abhishek Banerjee. This piece understands the prompt at a structural level, not just a thematic one. The Pedagogue of Recurring Hours reframes the woven threshold as something developmental rather than geographic, a phase you pass through, not a place you arrive at. That choice alone feels deeply in the spirit of this shared universe. The horror doesn't wait behind a door or beneath a ruin, it emerges through repetition, through proximity, through noticing what everyone else has learned to metabolize away. Dr. Iris Venn is a near-perfect bearer of the pattern. Not chosen, not gifted, simply positioned. What makes this story so effective is how it treats knowledge as a bodily process. Eating becomes forgetting, digestion becomes mercy. When that process fails, the cost isn't madness or death, but function. Iris doesn't break reality. She becomes part of the infrastructure that keeps it stitched together. The children are the most unsettling element here, not as victims, not as monsters, but as mechanisms. Their games aren't symbolism, they're labor. Quiet, necessary labor that reality depends on but cannot acknowledge. That idea dovetails beautifully with the prompt's central question: what must be surrendered to keep the knowledge? In this case, the answer is horrifyingly mundane: identity, appetite, narrative closure. By the end, Iris isn't trapped or transformed in a dramatic sense. She's integrated. She becomes a fixed point the pattern can rely on, a witness who stopped forgetting and therefore had to stop being fully human. That restraint, refusing spectacle in favor of inevitability, is what makes this cosmic horror feel intimate rather than abstract. This story doesn't just participate in the shared atmosphere of the Loom and the Maw universe. It demonstrates how flexible and dangerous that atmosphere can be when applied to everyday systems we already trust: education, research, childhood, routine. And the final warning lands exactly where it should. You don't need to seek the pattern. You only need to be available. And Connor's reviews here just get better and better as I go on. But yes, no, Abhishek always does amazing work with the prompts because I really feel like they dig deep into the themes and the specific elements that I present in ways that I didn't even consider. And I agree that that's what's happened here, right? Like, this approach fits perfectly into Connor's shared universe, but it's not necessarily the approach I would have taken. And that's why it's so fun to see these prompts and how they inspire different writers. But Abhishek's work here was fantastic, so great review from Connor. Next up is The Wish by Nicholas Barely. The Wish approaches the woven threshold through longing rather than location. The threshold here isn't a ruin or place you enter, it's a desire carried forward until it becomes inescapable. The poem frames the bearer of the pattern as someone marked early, not by prophecy but by expectation, he who will see. From the outset, knowledge is positioned not as curiosity, but as inheritance. What this piece does especially well is collapse time. Immortality is not treated as power, but as prolonged exposure. The speaker doesn't conquer death, he outlasts meaning. In doing so, the pattern reveals itself not as salvation, but as repetition without witness, a cycle that continues even after purpose erodes. The cost of knowing arrives with devastating clarity. The speaker understands everything, and that understanding strips away relationship, urgency, and even grief. The final horror isn't cosmic scale or divine punishment, it's endurance without context. Knowledge that cannot be shared. Memory that cannot be surrendered. A thread that will not be severed even if it frays. This is a strong example of the prompt's core idea that proximity to truth doesn't elevate the knower, it isolates them. The Wish understands that in cosmic horror, the most terrifying outcome isn't destruction, it's persistence. Beautiful. Love it. Great review from Connor. And yes, Nicholas has been doing a few of the power-up prompts recently, and it's always just fantastic work. Again, it's a unique angle, and Nicholas's work always offers a really strong takeaway. And here, for example, it's how it zooms in on the prompt's core idea, and I love seeing that from Nicholas's work each week. Fantastic. Next up, we have First by Mariah K. Porter. First engages the woven threshold as a place of inheritance rather than discovery. The temple is not merely a sacred site or a veil between worlds, it is a mechanism of delay, a structure built to keep a truth suspended rather than resolved. The longer Nivara remains near it, the clearer it becomes that the threshold isn't hiding God from her, it is protecting something else from consequence. Nivara is a compelling bearer of the pattern precisely because her insight doesn't arrive through symbols or visions alone, but through persistence. She asks the same questions across decades, pressing the same wound again and again, and refuses to accept institutional answers that exist only to preserve power. The pattern in this story manifests as a recurring impulse, the need to reconcile belief with evidence, divinity, and absence. The cost of knowing unfolds slowly and mercilessly. What begins as sacrifice in pursuit of truth curdles into coercion and violation. Nivara's certainty becomes indistinguishable from cruelty, and her conviction that she is freeing others blinds her to the violence of transformation without consent. The horror here isn't the presence of chained divinity, it's the realization that proximity to truth does not guarantee moral clarity. By the end, First makes a sharp, unsettling turn. Knowledge does not redeem Nivara, and it does not restore what was lost. Instead, it isolates her into something singular, relentless, and ultimately indistinguishable from the forces she opposed. The threshold notices her, but it does not intervene. it only records. This is a strong level 3 response to the prompt, mythic in scope, intimate in its cruelty, and unafraid to let certainty become the most dangerous element in the room. Yes. And I agree wholeheartedly. Mariah's work this week was incredible. I've just recently started reading her work, but it's incredible the amount of character development and the profound implications of this story that she manages to convey within the span of a single piece like this. It is really special stuff. Highly recommended. If you're not subscribed to Mariah, now's the time. Next up, we have, and this is the title, Bradley Ramsey and Connor Mancuso Made Me Write Cosmic Horror by J.M. Gooding. J.M. Gooding approaches the woven threshold sideways by turning it into a creative interface rather than a ruin or temple. The threshold here is not a physical location, but a system, a liminal space where art is categorized, approved, or quietly discarded. Reality's seams appear as genre boundaries, metrics, and algorithms, structures meant to organize creation that instead reveal how fragile and arbitrary those structures are. The bearer of the pattern is the narrator himself, not because he seeks forbidden knowledge, but because he cannot stop noticing where rules break down. He writes into the seams instinctively, compelled toward emotional residue rather than clean classification. The recurring pattern manifests as repetition across prompts, the same refusal to comply cleanly, the same insistence on slipping between labels, the same return to meaning over structure. The cost of knowing is subtle but sharp. The narrator understands that to keep writing this way, to keep honoring emotional truth over system compliance, means forfeiting institutional support, visibility without validation, engagement without endorsement. The horror is not cosmic annihilation, but estrangement, being seen by readers while remaining illegible to the mechanisms that decide what counts. What makes this entry particularly effective is how it reframes cosmic horror as a creative condition. The vast, stitched manager is not an alien god, but an accumulation of discarded drafts, abandoned ideas, and bureaucratic logic. An entity born from collective refusal to let work exist without classification. Knowledge here doesn't transform the narrator into something monstrous, it confirms what he already is and what the system cannot be. This is a strong interpretive response to the prompt, one that treats the pattern not as destiny imposed from outside, but as a recurring creative truth that refuses containment. The threshold notices, the system responds, and the writer walks back through the door anyway. Absolutely amazing from Connor there. Wonderful review of JM's piece. And yes, if this is your first time hearing about one of JM's more, shall we say, meta-themed stories, his work really does span all kinds of different genres, and I particularly enjoy when he does stuff like this that is very much kind of breaking the fourth wall, but also delivering an incredibly profound story and touching upon topics that blur the lines between reality and fiction. Fantastic stuff. All right, next up, I'm going to dive into a few more stories that came in after Connor was under the weather. So we'll start with a story written by Connor himself. So next up, we've got Seams Seen by Connor Mancuso. I'm amazed that Connor had time, by the way, to help write the prompt, review the submissions, and then write a full-length piece of his own. Honestly, if anybody can do that, though, it's Connor. With this story, Connor sought to tell a story about thresholds, patterns, and the cost of knowing. More than that, though, he wanted to offer up a new kind of fear. The one that comes from realizing the world is functioning exactly as intended. After all, what's worse? Thinking the world is out to get you or realizing that it's indifferent to your pain? I love the way these themes come through in the story. Connor allows the dread to slowly trickle in, and with each line it feels like sanity and stability are unraveling. I also noticed connections here to his broader universe, including some nods to the novel. It's subtle, but if you read this and then you read the book, or vice versa, you'll see why I love writing and reading connected universes. It's those small, subtle threads that really tie it together and make the experience unique and special. Fantastic work from Connor. Next up, we've got New Voices, Walkway Blues, The Vol by Robert C. Worstel. And from here on out, I'll be handling the last several entries for this week's Power Up prompt. So again, thank you to Connor. Here's my review of Robert's piece. With this story, Robert stepped back into the world of fiction writing and challenged himself to tell the story in the space of a word count that would fit into an email. Something I loved about this piece is how Robert grabs your attention immediately by offering just enough details to create a sense of mystery and intrigue. At the beginning of the story, we're just as confused and disoriented as the main character, but that really works, because now you're invested in their story right alongside them. And as the story goes on, Robert layers in more and more answers until the situation becomes clear. It's well-paced, and it leaves you on a great cliffhanger that's both satisfying and compelling. Robert mentioned in the post about doing a serialized novel, and honestly, Robert, if this is the kind of stuff we can expect from you for a series like that, I'm telling you right now that I am in. Next up, we've got The Terror by Daniel Coates. So, cosmic horror is a new genre for Daniel, but I gotta say, he understood the assignment here. You know a story is good when its final moments leave me with my eyebrows raised and my jaw firmly on the floor. What I loved about this piece is how the dread and horror sneaks up on you. It's clear from the beginning that our protagonists are trespassing upon some sort of cursed or unholy ground, but it has the fun banter of a classic horror story. As they continue to push towards the forbidden secrets in front of them, the story takes a turn into the realm of cosmic terror as we hear more and more about these strange and surreal sights that defy normal reality. The sense of unease and dread rises and crescendos until you can see the exact moment when they cross a line they'll never be able to come back from. From that point in the story, all hell breaks loose, and the story turns the terror up to 11. The final moments are shocking, gruesome, but beautifully horrific. It reminds me a lot of H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Color Out of Space, but this is a different take on the concept and really unique. Fantastic work from Daniel. Really enjoyed this one. Our next piece is The Surveyor by Loki Kohn. Right off the bat, I just love how Loki Kohn knows how to set a scene and establish a sense of atmosphere in their stories. The first line that we get in this post is a dedication of sorts that reads, "For the uncharted places and those who walk them." We also get a quote up top from Cormac McCarthy that reads, "Whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent." I mean, come on, how cool is that? Those two elements immediately establish a rich tone for the story, and once you start reading, all it takes is a couple sentences before Loki Kohn pulls you into the world and sets the stage beautifully. And the writing, of course, is almost lyrical in how well it's written, but it packs a punch with every single line. Really, honestly, you gotta check it out. I love the way that Loki Kohn creates a sense of place in their work. It's amazing stuff. And in this story, our protagonist's obsession with this plateau is also beautifully rendered. It comes through in the way they dream about it, the way it plays tricks on them, and of course, the way that it slowly drives them mad. It's an insanely cool story with really rich details, and I just have to recommend, after the story, reading the author's notes that Loki Kohn includes, because it dives into the deeper themes and inspiration behind the story, along with other topics. I'm telling you, this is one writer you don't want to be sleeping on. Every week I've had the chance to explore more of their work, I am consistently reminded why I love reading everything they put out. So be sure to check out this amazing story and all the others in the show notes. And when Connor's feeling better, I gotta recommend that he read this one too. Our final Power Up Prompt story this week is Over the Precipice by Richard Loder. With this story, Richard has hidden 5 messages within the piece, and you can learn more about that in the opening section of the post. I love it when authors experiment with immersive elements like this, so I wanted to shout out that really cool detail. The structure of this piece is fantastic. It uses journal entries to put us directly into the mind of the protagonist, which allows us to get deep insights into how they're thinking and reacting to what they've discovered. In this case, it's a seemingly infinite library that lies beyond a strange threshold. With each entry, Richard expertly layers in elements of doubt, uncertainty, and of course horror. In this case, it's an existential type of terror, the feeling that we're brushing up against the truth that isn't meant to be seen. And of course, at the end, we see the final mystery, which is presented with redacted text, which I really liked. The story here fires on all cylinders, and I gotta say, it has great depth, atmosphere, intrigue, and structure, all presented in a way that adds to the immersion. Stellar work from Richard, and a fantastic way to close out this week's Power Prompt Stories. Be sure to check it out. See if you can crack the code. And again, thank you to Connor Mancuso, too, for helping write the prompt this week and for reviewing the vast majority of the stories. Again, we all hope you feel better soon, Connor, because we love having you here in the community. Next up, we'll get into our weekly writing discussion right after a quick mindful moment. Hey there, this is Chill Bradley, here with this week's mindful moment. Here's a quote to consider. The most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. Amelia Earhart. That quote is right on the money. I think we can all agree that change is scary. But if you really had to nail down what makes it so frightening, it's that moment where you have to take a leap of faith. It's the moment when you jump into something new, not knowing what comes next. The fear of the unknown. Change is scary, but it can lead to good things. We just have to make that decision to act. And of course, that's far easier said than done. Fear often tends to hold us back. So for this week's mindful moment, I want you to pause and think about a time where fear almost held you back, but you pushed through. Remember how you felt when the dust settled, how things worked out in your favor. Change doesn't always have to be bad. Sometimes it can open doors to bigger and better opportunities. We just have to take the leap. Thanks for listening. Back to the show. All right, and we're back. For this week's writing discussion, I asked you to tell me about vulnerability in your work. And of course, like with every writing discussion, I brought this up for a reason. This week, my guest on the show that we'll get to soon, we talk a lot about vulnerability and putting ourselves into our writing. And before we jump into the responses from this week's discussion thread, I wanted to just share a little bit about how I approach it. And it's interesting because as time has gone on, I've become more and more comfortable with putting more of myself into my work and obviously sharing more kind of directly, nonfiction pieces, whether it's my articles about writing or the weekly Mindful Monday checkpoints where I really just kind of let my philosophical side come out. And being vulnerable can be really scary, and it doesn't always end well. I mean, this is the internet, right? There's going to be people who respond negatively or who see weakness and latch onto you and try to get a rise out of you. It's just unfortunately how things work. That being said, Substack in this community has really allowed me to become comfortable with being vulnerable. And that's because I see other people doing it all over the place. I see people sharing incredible stories, inspiring stories. And that has been the case since I joined. So I want to continue being vulnerable as well because they inspire me. But that is, of course, my approach. Let's take a look at what everybody else had to say this week. First up, Flora M. Brown says, "Hi, Bradley. As a life story coach, I have a lot to say about vulnerability in our writing. Those of us who were raised in the don't air your dirty laundry era grew up being silent about what we heard and saw in our households and families. As I began looking at documents as part of my interest in my genealogy, as a result, I had to piece together information because family members had withheld details about marriage, parentage, etc. They felt safe withholding details from the past as it made them out of sight, out of mind, and didn't happen. As I began writing my own life story, especially after I got married and had a family, I began by sharing openly, often giving details that weren't necessarily needed to advance the story. As online predators became skillful at manipulating information for all kinds of purposes, however, I began pulling back on my openness with details I shared online and publicly. Eventually, I found myself writing two versions, complete details for the family legacy and broad strokes for the public version. With the advent of AI that can animate our images and put words in our virtual mouths, I've become even more cautious about what I share. It's very disheartening to learn that the disclosure of anything we post online is possibly saved somewhere and can be used for many shady purposes. Of course, throughout history, long before AI, malicious folks never hesitated to create their own version of facts to malign, misrepresent, or straight out lie to advance a narrative, destroying someone's reputation or win elections. I just don't want to hand them the ammunition. When it comes to sharing about my adult kids, for example, I ask their permission to share even what seems harmless, and definitely get their permission to post photos of them and their kids online. It chaps my hide to realize the truth about how anything I share online or in print can be used for evil intent. My advice to life story/memoir students is to write your rough draft with complete openness, telling the truth as you see it, owning your story as it happened to you. No one has to ever see that version, but the writing of it, though not therapy, can help with healing. Then, in the editing stage, decide what to keep for public view and publication. I know Anne Lamott famously said, if people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better. In practice, however, while she urges us to tell the truth in our own stories, she doesn't support writing for revenge or with the intent to hurt someone. Beautiful response here from Flora. Thank you so much for that. I agree with so many of these points here, and I think I was also someone that kind of grew up in that out of sight, out of mind, don't air your dirty laundry era. That's something I resonate with. And yes, the advent of AI does complicate things when it comes to all of the examples that Flora gave in here. It's a tough balance, but I think Flora's got something nice here where she asks permission and she still writes a version that is true to herself because there is catharsis in that, right? There is a therapeutic element in being vulnerable, even if you don't share it widely. And I understand completely why she would take this approach here. So thank you again, Flora. Amazing, amazing response. Let's check out what else people said. Next, Mina Howell says, I've definitely put real world events into some stories, and it got criticism that was hard for me to swallow, though. So I kind of stopped putting things that happened to me in my story, and now I just stick with certain emotions and fears. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the kind of thing I expected to hear, and I think a lot of us have had experiences like that. That being said, I think what Mina's landed on here with kind of sticking to certain emotions and fears, it's still your truth. It's just presented in a way that fits into the story in such a way where, as Flora said, it's not ammunition. So I think that's a fair approach. It's just sad to hear, though, that, you know, when people try to be open and honest, more often than not, you get nasty trolls, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's just unfortunate, but great answer from Mina. Next up, J. Allen Winchester says, it started as me splintering aspects of myself to explore them through the eyes of the character as I watch them grow. I tend to let my characters tell me who they are, so development feels very intuitive in my writing. As I matured as a person, I was inspired by the stories of people I had encountered and befriended, and I wanted the spirit of their journey to be shared. There are so many amazing stories that many will never hear, so when a side character in one of my works opens up about something, oftentimes this was because someone did the same with me once. I suppose that is the core of my human-driven stories. I want readers to meet someone, befriend them, or maybe learn from their paths. So often I hear people want to see themselves in books, but I challenge readers to empathize with someone and their struggles to grow along with them. Obviously, both are valid perspectives, but my goal is to draw people together by seeing through someone else's eyes for a moment. That's beautiful, and honestly, exactly the kind of wonderful answer that I would expect from my friend Jaden here. And I wholeheartedly agree. I love this idea that you can let people that you've met and the way that they impacted you inform your characters and create similar journeys in your stories, which will then allow other people to take those journeys. Amazing stuff. Wonderful answer. Next up, Nicholas Barely says, I try to combine my own vulnerability while making my writing applicable to the reader at the same time. Sometimes it comes across and sometimes it doesn't. It's taken a lot of internal work/therapy to be able to dig deeper into the man versus self conflict and put it into words. Yeah, and Nicholas brings a really good point there. This is one of those things where there's no right way to do it, and a lot of people, and myself included, are still figuring out how we want to do it in our work and how to find that balance. So very good point from Nicholas there. For this next one, Loki Cone chimed in, and apparently they said something almost identical to Nicholas. So it's one of those you kind of had to be there sort of moments in the chat, but I wanted to acknowledge that Loki Cone also said some similar stuff about the balances and kind of working through that internal conflict. So thank you, Loki Cone. That was a crazy coincidence. Next up, Mariah K. Porter says, I've habitualized vulnerability through social media for years now, to the extent that I recently realized what I share is only what I feel confident to defend myself in. Is that really vulnerability at that point? Over the last few weeks, I've been working on opening up about where I am, even when I don't have all the answers. I don't have to wait until post-outcome to be confident in my decisions. I share from both my past and present regularly. In all my years of sharing personal essays publicly, I've mostly felt invisible and ignored, but I'm holding on tight to the idea that these can help people and may already be helping more people than I'd guess. I've received a few comments and messages from people who have shared that they feel inspired and or empowered by my story, and that's not nothing. I suppose continuing to share in the ways I've known how, despite little or no engagement, is, in its own way, a form of vulnerability. In my fictional writing, I seldomly give characters problems that exactly mirror my lived experiences, but I tend to give them my emotional experiences wrapped up in different packages. Many are based on who I felt I was at stages when I was sure my emotional limitations defined me. Great stuff from Mariah here, and some really good points that resonate with me. It's definitely hard feeling like you're kind of shouting into the void. That's something that, we've talked about on the show here, and something that I imagine will come up again. But I definitely, understand that aspect of it. And I do think that is its own form of vulnerability, continuing to put yourself out there. And to Mariah's point, a lot of times we don't see the way that our work helps people because a lot of people, just kind of read and then absorb and move on. A lot of people, forget to leave a like or they don't have time to leave a comment. and but you still help them anyway, right? And so that's something that I always try to remember myself, especially when things aren't getting the engagement that I would normally expect. You're still helping people, I think, is really the takeaway here. And the second part here about having characters kind of go through similar emotional experiences, that's pretty on the money for how I've approached it in my work, especially in fiction. And I think that's extremely valid. I think that's a good way for the author to kind of put themselves out there, but because it's fiction, you are the one that knows kind of where it came from. And I think that's fair. Next up, Daniel Coates says, so I generally try to mix in a little of my own feelings to my stories to add weight I know to go to my writing, to the emotions I want to evoke. I did go extremely off the deep end with putting a lot of myself in one piece, though. Here's the little flash fiction story. And he has a link in there, so definitely check it out. I haven't read that one yet, Daniel, but I will. Thank you for your response. Next up, Luna Ashley Colsu says, I use a lot of myself in my stories without realizing. I have been working on a novella called Hollow Mothers, and honestly, it was first a screenplay and not called Mothers. I started from folk horror / supernatural and ended up with a bunch of grieving mothers in a supernatural compound with an FMC dealing with her trauma for something she could not help. Sound familiar at all since you know my story, Bradley? Yes, it does sound familiar. I mean, I have the writer undone and now the Casa Uslu newsletter, and those are intentional, but the stories always happen without me realizing. Yeah, this is great, Luna. Thank you. And yeah, it's interesting how we subconsciously will put ourselves into our work without realizing it. But I think that's, especially in your case, Luna, I think that's where a lot of your work shines, because the emotions in your story and the character arcs, they always feel very, very authentic. They feel like lived experiences. And I think that's you subconsciously putting your own experiences in there, and it's making everything feel more authentic in your story as a result. So, it comes from a place of trauma and obviously things that you have been through, but your stories really resonate because you allow yourself to show up in them. I think that's amazing. All right. Next up, Malric Wraithmore, the liturgist, says, I've personally talked about my own personal trauma in a series called Family Portraits. I write without a face, so I'm free to wield a sharper blade, which allows me to put as much of the dark that made me into the stories I create. A lot of what I write reflects on identity and mental health. I'm comfortable sharing and using what I've experienced in it. I recently revamped Red Riding Hood based on a real person I knew with themes of neglect and dysfunctional relationships. A lot of what I write inhabits the vulnerabilities I feel. I think that is the most truest representation I can give. I never fear exposing myself like this. I can only ask how I can go deeper. Yeah, Malric brings up a really good point there about, writers who choose not to show their face. It allows them, because then they're not worried about people recognizing them, right? And so that does provide a semblance of freedom in the sense that you can, just say whatever you want, right? Like it's one of the positive aspects of the anonymity aspect of the internet, right? And in this case, I think Malric is using it for the better. It allows the stories to be very raw and real. And I like that Red Riding Hood one because, again, when you take something that people know, like a fairy tale, and then you apply it to a real world situation, people can connect with it because they recognize the themes of the fairy tale. And then they're able to connect deeper because you got them hooked in with that initial concept. Great stuff. All right, next up, Jackie Parker says, every one of my characters is a version of me. As an author of character-driven, deeply interior writing, it helps. A lot. I have found it to be incredibly healing to see my characters who represent me at different stages in life succeed, find hope and happiness, find love. Oh, I love that. Great answer from Jackie. Yeah, I think in the past, a lot of my characters were versions of me, and certainly some still are, but as time has gone on, and as I've grown as a writer, I think it's a combination, right? Like there's definitely at least a little bit of me in my characters, always. But then I've also kind of, as others have said here, pulled in different emotions and experiences and used that to kind of birth the character and allow them to kind of come into their own. But I do love that answer. Thank you, Jackie. Next up, Random Syllables says, I firmly believe that creative writing without a piece of ourselves is a futile attempt. I remember someone tried to write a protagonist who was their opposite, but not all quantities have an opposite. Furthermore, by choosing the furthest from the truth, one was still using themselves as the frame of reference. I myself write honest articles and discuss deep reflections. I've been working on one about living with a phobia and how it is beyond a mere dislike of something. In my fiction, I often use my own fears to fuel the tension. I may also choose a protagonist who embodies parts of me I feel are misunderstood or under attack. Showing weakness is an invitation to bond and foster deeper trust and connection. It comes at high risk, which is why it is effective. Random syllables, thank you so much. That was a fantastic response here. I cannot agree more with that last part. Like I said at the beginning, weakness is something where when you show that vulnerability, you do open yourself up to high risk, as Random Syllables said, but then you also open up yourself to incredibly strong bonds and resonance with other people that have had similar experiences. And that, I think, is a risk/reward that is worth seriously considering. So great answer there. Next up, Becky Hayward says, my fiction has all of me in it. My characters are versions of me, or they serve as mirrors for something I am struggling with or working through. I think my fiction is more vulnerable, with the cover of fiction, than my essays, which tend to be more educational. What a great conversation, and enjoying such thoughtful responses. Thank you, Becky. And thank you for participating as well. Yeah, I think it's unavoidable, as we've said in some of the other responses, for authors to have themselves in their work. And I think it's totally valid for characters to be versions of you or mirrors of something that you've been through. I think it's really, really valid. And I think it's a great way to kind of work through things in your writing. So thank you, Becky. Next up, J.M. Gooding says, late to the party because I had to think about this one. Most of my work is rooted in real experiences or emotional states. At Night in particular was originally based on an encounter that happened at a karaoke night, but didn't end the way the story ends. My nonfiction tends to blend personal experience with facts, but not in a vulnerable way. But I don't see vulnerability as raw disclosure. It's closer to performance. The honesty comes from how the material is shaped, not how closely it maps to my life. My writing is vulnerable, but almost never confessional. And again, J.M. Gooding, always with the fantastic answers, and I love the consideration here about the different perspectives. You know, there is a difference between vulnerability and sort of confession, and I think that the way that J.M. kind of totes the line here and explains it in the lens of how he does vulnerability in his work is really nice. Thank you, J.M. Next up, Taylor V says, I can't recall incorporating any of myself into any of my fiction writing. I mainly use other fictional characters as my inspiration. If I write anything about myself, it's usually in the form of a personal essay, nonfiction, or poetry. When it comes to personal essays and nonfiction, I usually write about lighter topics of my past, but I save the more emotional and traumatic topics for poems, since I feel I have an easier time portraying those emotions in poems. I see myself as an open book, but there are still some things I just haven't really opened up about. Totally fair, Taylor, and a great answer. I think I myself also find that poetry is a lot easier for conveying some of those more kind of emotional and traumatic topics, as you said. It's just something about the medium that really works well for me, so I definitely see you there. And yeah, I mean, as time goes on, I think it's one of those things where you'll come to understand what you want and don't want to open up about, and there's no right or wrong answer there. So, great stuff, Taylor. Next up, Alex Cosgrove says, I play it out in my mind. I let it happen as naturally as possible. Like real life, mirroring how brief and instant things really are. We don't ever meet people and ask, tell me your life story. We get to know them through their actions and choices, what they say and how they carry themselves. I do the same with my characters. Really great point from Alex. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, part of what makes fiction work so well is when it feels natural. And just like Alex said, you don't ask people to tell their life story in just a natural conversation. It's really about, as time goes on, their actions and choices. So great call out there. All right, and last but not least, Eric McCormick says, I try to use my fiction as a means of exploring metaphysical theory, as well as to reframe trauma, pain, and suffering through an occult lens. Generally, I keep the story contained. I don't explore the characters beyond the context of the story, neither before nor after, and rarely elaborate on or explain the situations in which they find themselves beyond what takes place in the story. I try my best to avoid dialogue that exists only for the sake of the reader, or narration that falls in love with its own voice. That being said, my trauma and vulnerability are engine and fuel for all of my fiction. Just because it didn't happen doesn't mean it isn't true. Wow, what a great last line there from Eric. Just because it didn't happen doesn't mean it isn't true. Love that. Love that. Love that. That really embodies a lot of my visions around fiction in general. So I love that last line. But in general, Eric, fantastic response here. And having read some of your work on the podcast before, I love this background here. And I agree. And I see what you're doing with your work. And for anyone listening, if you haven't read Eric's work, it is exceptional. The style is in a league of its own. I highly recommend it. All right, and a huge thank you to everyone who submitted answers to this week's discussion. This was by far the most responses I've ever gotten. Amazing to see. I post these every Wednesday in my subscriber chat, and I read the responses as you heard on the show. So keep an eye out and share your thoughts for the chance to have me read and discuss your answers right here on the podcast. And now, without further delay, it is time for our featured guest interview. This week, I'm really excited to sit down with an author who recently rebranded his publication here on Substack and launched a new nonfiction publication as well, with articles about creativity, being a writer, and much more. This is a really wonderful and authentic discussion that I think you're all really going to enjoy. So grab yourself a drink, relax, and let's get into this week's featured guest interview. All right, everybody. And this week on the Saved as Draft podcast, I'm excited to welcome an Oregon-based writer, cat dad, and foodie who publishes works of many genres, from science fiction to cozy fantasy, poetry, prose, and now nonfiction as well. He really does it all. Please welcome to the show, A.M. Bowman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So let's start off by having you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your creative journey thus far.
Sure. I think I started creating pretty early, just as a way of processing emotions that I didn't quite know how to either handle or identify or communicate. And I don't really remember exactly how I created. I just know why I did. And that was as a means to communicate what I was feeling. When I have like my first discrete memory of actually creating something specifically, it was songs. I would just make up songs and sing them to my parents. And it was something that, looking back, I was a little embarrassed because, they're just kind of sing songs. But I think that was the first time it kind of happened. And from there was a moment in grade school, and I'm actually going to go into this on an essay that I'm writing, but there was a point where I just felt like what I was feeling wasn't communicable, like on a fundamental level. And so that's when I started to draw. That's when I started to write. That's when I started to journal. And then, I really had my first kind of concrete creative phase when I reached kind of junior high, and I started to do a lot of songwriting, a lot of lyric writing, and that just kind of continued throughout junior high, high school. And actually there was a major drop off after high school up until a few years ago where I didn't really create at all. And I think that in part it was natural because I was focusing on my profession, and I didn't really have the mind space to focus on other things. But I think the other part was not really realizing that both could coexist. And so at this point, or really, I would say about a year ago is when I started to kind of rediscover my creative side and really started to cultivate it a lot more. And so I have a long history, but my recent history is actually pretty recent.
Okay. Right. So what's interesting about that is that you mentioned you started with songwriting and lyrics and stuff. At what point did you shift from kind of musical writing and song lyrics over to what you're doing now, which is of course more like prose, poetry, and articles?
Yeah, I don't remember a discrete point in time, but there was a goal that I had when I was transitioning into high school, and when everybody said, what do you want to do when you grow up? My answer was, I want to be a journalist. I want to write.
Okay.
I enjoyed writing up until that point. But I think writing was just a thing that I had to do, for school and everything. And so I viewed it more as like a profession. It wasn't a creative outlet for me per se. I viewed those two separately. Like music, writing lyrics was creative, but writing prose was more of an academic or professional venture. But when I really started to kind of see the possibilities for creative writing was when I was a senior in high school, and I wrote the start of my first story, and was really encouraged by a teacher of mine, which I wish I remembered their name, but they were my senior English teacher. I wrote maybe the first couple pages of what could be a short story, and they were just like, "This is phenomenal! Like, where
Mm,
did this come from?"
mm-hmm.
And that was the first time I kind of felt the rush of like, "Oh man, maybe I can create something that's cool
Yeah.
and that other people can kind of relate to."
Interesting. I love that. I've heard a few guests on the show mention that that they had a teacher or someone like that in their lives that encouraged them. It's interesting how often that plays such a crucial role, in the development of people as creatives and as writers. So I love to hear it.
Yeah, and I can't over exaggerate like the role that a lot of teachers have played in my life.
Mm,
A lot of what I do professionally is teach, and a lot of that is because of where I received a lot of investment like growing up, which I didn't really appreciate at the time, but as time has gone on, it's become a bit of a passion and definitely retrospectively something that like I like deeply deeply appreciate.
sure.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that maybe for I don't know, it sounds like it's definitely not unique for our community that teachers are the people that would recognize and kind of cultivate this.
Right.
Uh, and so it's kind of like a shared experience, which is a beautiful thing in my
Mm,
mind.
hmm.
It's really cool.
Yeah. No, I wholeheartedly agree. Do you remember what that short story was about? Do you remember the premise of it?
I do. So it was a prompt.
Mm,
And the prompt was that there is a sailboat that is appearing from the mist floating towards you on a dock.
mm.
Where is that boat coming from and what is it supposed to do?
Good prompt. Yeah.
And yeah, it was a great prompt. And what I didn't focus on was plot. I didn't know much about plot at the time,
Hmm.
but what I did focus on was atmosphere.
Mm,
And I wanted to create a really eerie, almost like supernatural vibe. I think that's probably the earliest manifestation I had of like anything related to fantasy.
okay.
And I really wanted like it to be like kind of create a sense of wonder, mystery, dread, and so that's kind of what I poured into it. And I I think the thing that I took away from it was that I had a goal for what I wanted to write, and it came across
Mm, hmm.
right. And that was the first time that I felt like I had been successful in that process,
Right. Right.
which was so powerful. It
Hmm.
was so cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can picture that moment, and I can kind of relate to that feeling. There's nothing quite like it.
Yeah, it's pretty unreal. Yeah, it's addicting for sure. You're like, I want more of this.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, my next question here is I was curious where you kind of go for inspiration when it comes to your creative works. Obviously, it sounds like music may be an inspiration, but what are some hobbies, I guess, that kind of fuel your creativity?
You know, that's changed over the years. I think music was a big part of it, and
Mm,
there's definitely while I'm writing, there are a number of people that have been on this podcast that have said the same thing that like what they listen to while they write is important. Setting the tone, the mood. There are certain bands and albums that I go back to because they capture a snapshot in time
hmm.
and an emotion that I may have felt during that time. I have albums that I listen to that remind me of the rain
Mm,
and kind of the feeling of introspection and reflection, and maybe more on like the melancholy side, which is something that I like to lean into.
sure.
Um, but these days, for inspiration itself, honestly, nature is a huge thing,
Mm, hmm.
um, and silence.
Mm.
Uh, oddly enough, I hated silence growing up, but now like it's something that I kind of crave.
Mm, I gotcha. Right, right, right. Just like a quiet moment, like where you're not distracted by a thousand things, as we often are, right?
Right. Yeah. Just to give my mind like room to breathe and
Mm,
room to just kind of settle into a rhythm on its own. Um, so yeah, silence is something that just kind of refreshes me, and I feel like inspiration is a lot of it is like what refreshes you, what fills that fuel tank
Yeah.
of being able to kind of go back out there and create some more. And I think, yeah, silence and being out in nature, listening to ambient sounds, being around, birds and hearing rivers and streams and that kind of stuff is really it fuels me. I wouldn't say it necessarily inspires me, but it fuels me to then write more and do more.
Yeah, it sounds like it creates the space for inspiration, right? Like it gives you that opportunity to get inspired.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really, really good way to describe it.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I love that answer. I've never heard anyone say that, but I honestly, I would agree with it a lot in the sense that, everyday life in 2026 is just chaos, right? Like it's just constant bombardment, constant stimulation from all kinds of sources. And so, yeah, I never realized how valuable silence can be.
Yeah, it's a commodity for sure. To be able to break off and to only have your thoughts, or sometimes honestly the absence of thoughts are really nice.
Right, right.
Just existing is kind of cool. So yeah, it's funny because I've been going through a period of borderline burnout in a lot of ways, which we'll talk more about. A lot of the advice I've been getting, which is great advice, is well, watch the shows that are really inspiring to you, listen to music, watch
Right.
movies, and there's something about doing that feeds my critical mind and it doesn't fuel my creative side.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever I consume things like that, I'm analyzing it. I'm not sitting there letting it inspire me because at this point, a lot of us like know what it takes to write a story, and we're evaluating how people are doing it, how well they're doing it, which avenues they've taken. And so I think that there are times when I've been like really surprised by TV shows, by movies. Definitely games are a huge thing. I've been playing this game called Expedition 33 that has just been blowing my mind with the depth of their world building and their storytelling abilities. Largely, I've just been craving silence. Oddly, I know quite else how to describe it.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. Like I said, I think it's something a lot of people would agree with. I feel like when people listen to this, they're going to be nodding along like, oh yeah, no, that's true. Silence is really valuable. It's like you said, a commodity. And also I have to say, as a fellow gamer, Expedition 33 was incredible. So I love that you're enjoying it. Yeah.
It's so good. I'm honestly like kind of taking it on in bits and pieces because I don't want it to be over.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, it's got some good side content, thankfully.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Just the cinematic aspect of it is just unreal.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like, oftentimes like the question is like, okay, what books have inspired you? And I think that the key to that question is like, have inspired me. These days I read a book and it doesn't transport me per se as much as it did while I was getting into the genre.
Right.
But, historically the books that have really gotten me and really inspired in how I write and what I aim to achieve are kind of classics like The Wheel of Time, the Drenai saga, Brandon Sanderson's probably, in everybody's top 5 at least, or top 10. And, I think most recently, though, N.K. Jemisin's work is something that just absolutely blows my mind in the complexity of her world building and the uniqueness of her social structures and just the kind of unique approach that she uses. And just she has a literary way of writing that's just kind of refreshing. And that's something that I've really, really been inspired by recently. I reread the Inheritance trilogy. I think that's what it's called recently. It's still good the second read through.
Nice. Okay, nice. So for my next question here, obviously you and I met through Substack. You've been on Substack for a little while now. Would love to know kind of 2 quick things. How long have you been on Substack? And then what's your experience kind of been, kind of becoming part of this community here?
Yeah, so I heard about it during the summer in August and I joined. I think I posted once or twice, and one of my favorite Substackers right now addresses the Substack note algorithm as the void, and I really felt like I was screaming into the void.
Yeah.
And so while I started in August, I kind of was like, this isn't really working. I don't really know what to do here.
Hmm.
And so I took a step back until the end of September. But the one thing that was great when I first joined is I met a really awesome guy, Javier.
Okay. Yeah.
Javier Mexico. So Javier was the first person to find something that I wrote. He is the first person that said you should submit this to Top in Fiction,
Mm,
and then from there he just helped me to get plugged in. He told me
nice.
about you.
Yeah.
He told me about Luna. He told me about basically the kind of what I call like the nexuses of the fiction Substack,
Right.
which create a community of writers, and you're like the penultimate like community builder. And pretty much from there it was just exponential.
Right.
The people that I met, the prompts, which I was just blown away with because it was the first indulgences, right?
Yeah.
Was the October? Yeah,
Yep.
the first indulgences. I wrote one of them, and I just then saw so many people just pump thing after thing after thing after thing out, and
Yeah.
of such high quality, and that just kind of lit a fire underneath my butt where I was just like, this is so cool
Hmm.
to have this kind of community where people are producing, they're sharing, they're encouraging, and it very quickly became my ideal writing community
Yeah.
where I felt like I actually belonged
Hmm.
for the first time in my life. Like I'm
Yeah.
not joking either.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, uh, so extremely grateful for everybody that I've met here,
Mm.
and for what everybody does for everybody else, and how we push each other, and how we inspire each other, and how we support each other. It's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I think that the tough part is that for the first couple months, it was really hard to find that.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that's not a unique experience, but once I did, I was just like, wow, this is next level. This is amazing. And so my experience has just been, I mean, beyond my expectations. I didn't expect anything close to this.
Right.
So it's been great.
Yeah. I love that story so much. Honestly, every time I hear stories like that, it just reinvigorates me. It gets me even more excited about, what we're doing here, because that's exactly the experience that I hope writers will have when they find this community, right? And it's like you said, the internet's a big place. Substack, even at its current size, is pretty massive, so it's like, how do you reach more people? How do you bring more people into the community? And it's exactly what happened with you. It's people like Javier, you
Yeah.
know, putting in the work to like be like, hey, come check this out. You know what I mean? It's that word of mouth. Um, that's just fantastic, though. I love that story so much.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of gives me chills like talking about it. Like
Yeah.
it's such a it's I don't know, it's almost like a storybook like introduction to something. It's like I'm in Storyland now, like
Right.
it's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, honestly, and your story mirrors my own in a lot of ways, where until I joined Substack, I too had never experienced that kind of welcoming, authentic, just very creative community. I wanted it, but I didn't even know where to look, right? Like I was jumping from platform to platform until I got here. And it was one of those things where, as soon as I saw the seeds of it kind of around me, I was like, okay, how do I nurture this? How do I grow this? Because I need this and I know other people need it too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I just love hearing stories like that. So my next question for you here, as we were talking before the interview, you recently kind of did like a soft relaunch, right? Like you have two separate publications now. And yeah, so I'd like to talk a little bit about what sparked that idea and kind of what your new setup looks like for people who are just now, discovering your work.
Yeah. So my journey has been really progressive in the sense that like I have been like learning a lot as I've been on my journey. And when I started originally, my idea was that it would be focusing on my work in progress, my novel that I'm working on. But it very quickly became anything but that. And so the original name that I picked with was focused on the world that my book is in.
Mm.
And then I realized very quickly that, like, I'm not mentioning this in any of the writing that I have or that I'm posting.
Mm.
That's kind of confusing. And I
Right.
realized that, like, when it comes to branding, it's necessary to have consistency,
Mm-hmm.
and to create kind of like a cohesive product. I'm not a marketer. I don't have a mind like that, but it's people like you with, like, the resources that you created that have kind of helped me to think, okay, well, if I want to promote what I'm doing, it'd be best for it to be simplified.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of centered my primary publication around my name, so A.M. Bowman Writes, just as kind of like a hub
Mm-hmm.
of my fiction. And that was a relatively recent thing, but it's been a long time coming, because I was realizing as I kind of posted and posted and posted that the novelist, which is the world that my work in progress is, that it just wasn't relevant.
Mm.
It was confusing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the separate publication aspect was a very spontaneous thing. I had only published two nonfiction works that I actually didn't send to my subscribers,
Mm.
because I just wasn't sure how it'd be received. I feel like, for me at least, my fiction does communicate a part of me, but not in such a vulnerable way as my nonfiction does.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just left it as if people find it, then great. The more people engaged with it, the more I realized how relatable it was and how helpful it might be to other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also just like how validating it is for me as the person writing it to have that level of engagement. I kind of got to the point where I was like, I started to see like a purpose for a second publication that was nonfiction. And that is basically what birthed Beneath the Armor, which I literally created 3 days ago, I think, 3 or 4 days ago.
Right.
But that idea was bubbling for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love the name of the new publication, Beneath the Armor. As you said, it's kind of nonfiction. It's more like kind of personal essays and kind of, like just real life sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
How else would you describe it? Like what kind of content do you have on there now? What do you have planned?
Yeah. So the idea that I have behind it is, I want to give a snapshot into my creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And I want the theme to be transparency.
Mm.
I know that as a reader, what I would always have loved is to have an author that's transparent about their process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have I'm very, very happy with like the subscribers that I have right now, but like, I'm no Robin Jordanson, or no J.R.R. Martin or whoever. But for the people that do read my stuff, I think it means something to be able to put yourself out there in a transparent way that can kind of maybe transform the work or inform the fiction that I am writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of it is that journey of writing, which most recently was a piece on burnout,
Mm.
because I am going through a period of like borderline burnout, which is a very natural ebb and flow for me. And what I have in mind, though, moving forward, is to talk more about male vulnerability, actually,
Mm.
and my story about growing up as what has been called or was called as I was growing up a hyper emotional boy.
Mm.
Someone that is extremely in tune with their emotions, someone who is intuitive or can intuit how other people feel. And discuss that because I feel like it's not unique to me.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that um, it's not discussed in the open that the average male can feel that deeply.
Right.
And I think that if you talk to most men, they would be like, "Oh yeah, no, I absolutely feel deeply," but it's either been stunted
Mm-hmm.
by their experiences and by trauma, or it hasn't been encouraged enough, or a combo of the two combined with not having the skills to be able to recognize the emotion and communicate the emotion.
Right. Right.
And there is a direct tie in between or between that and creativity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people um, create in order to express things that they otherwise don't know how to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I feel like probably the biggest essay that I'm working on is on that subject directly.
Mm.
And that's a big passion of mine. It's something that's a very recent journey in my own emotional and mental health. And I want there to be a spotlight on
Yeah.
that. And I want that to be more in the open
Yeah.
uh, and discussed more openly. Because I just gave a one off note that said, "Hey, I'm thinking about writing on male vulnerability in the creative process," and it hasn't gone viral or anything, but just the number of male writers that have come out of the woodwork and said this would be huge,
Yeah.
or other writers who are parents saying like this would be huge for my kid,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of verified that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the idea behind it. Um, and that's one major essay that'll probably take a while for me to work on until I'm ready to kind of release it. But the one that I'll probably release before that is on the parallels between fire and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that I have a borderline obsession with fire, the many applications that you can, you know, use it as an allegory, as an analogy, as like a direct comparison, uh, in life and in creativity and in fantasy. I think there's a reason why fire magic appeals to so many people.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that's going to come out, I think, within the next like week or two. But the other piece is going to take longer for me to, I think, nail down and get it where I want it to be, because I think it needs that level of attention and
Yeah.
respect,
Yeah.
or kind of releasing it to the wild.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly I could foresee, the male vulnerability kind of topic being a whole series of articles, right? Like there's so many different things you could do, but I love that you're kind of, starting with something substantial there. In general, something that I've noticed since I've joined Substack is that the amount of people who are willing to be vulnerable in the community is extremely inspiring. It's inspired me to be more open. And then in turn, seeing the community sort of welcome that vulnerability and create that space where it's okay to just, be yourself. I mean, that's unheard of on social
Yeah.
media.
Honestly, in our culture, in our world, like that's why this is such a special pocket. And
Yeah.
I just hope it gets bigger and bigger and has more of a wide reaching effect. But at the same time, I want it to stay the same size so that it's
Right.
not affected.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It is one of those things where it's like, I recently posted about my first year on Substack, and I definitely had, in that post lots of great examples and things that happened, but a few moments, in time that were not great, where
Yeah.
we kind of had stuff that affected the community in a negative way, or so on and so forth. And that's the risk you run, right? When you open the doors and when you grow like that, you run the risk of that. So it's
Yeah.
it's tough, because I agree with you. It's like, let's keep this exactly the way that it is, but
Yeah.
also we should be welcoming in more people, and it's like that double-edged sword, right?
Yeah. 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 No, it's something that you have to be extremely aware of, especially in the climate that we live in.
Yeah.
That you know, emotional topics generate emotional responses, so there's no
Yeah.
way around that.
Hmm.
And so if you just talk about dragons and wizards and magic and stuff, which I love doing, then it's easy to kind of separate yourself from the emotional roller coaster that's out there.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that authors do have done historically, and what literature does, is it reveals the human mind and the human soul, and it basically is a snapshot of that. I think the best authors really put themselves out there, and it's a hard thing to do. It invites critique, and it invites pain, but that's what vulnerability is, like being willing to accept that there may be pain and suffering as a result of what you're doing, but that it's worth doing anyways.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. Yeah, wholeheartedly agree.
And a lot of that's from great thought leaders in the field. The first one that always pops to mind for me is Brene Brown, which for the longest time I discounted, but she has so much great work that she's done on shame, on vulnerability, that has really helped me a ton. And I just want to tie that into creativity.
Yeah.
And it's funny because as I was writing that main piece on male vulnerability that I was talking about, whenever you talk about growing up as a boy, you were gonna run into gender roles, right? Traditional gender roles.
Yeah.
And the thing that I immediately saw in there was the potential for it to become something more than just my lived experience, and something that could be detrimental to the conversation and to the community. And that's part of the reason why I'm not sure how to release it in a way that creates the right kind of conversation, and doesn't encourage other types of conversation. Because I'm really big on describing, or I'm really big on commenting on things that I've experienced and not going anywhere near things that I haven't experienced.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so whenever you get into the topic of things like male vulnerability, it can be dicey, and I'm not an expert. I'm not trained to write those kind of things. And so I take it with a very considered measure of respect.
Yeah.
So that's something that's on my mind, especially in light of the things that have happened in the community, because I think me, like most of our community members, agree with you and how we've approached that. And so it's tough. Yeah. Part of me is working through this conversation too. So
sure.
I think male vulnerability is a really important topic, especially for creatives. And how, if you have an author who, releases stuff that is interesting to someone that hasn't learned anything about male vulnerability, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, they've written other stuff on a different topic, that can open up their mind to something that can really change, I think, generations of people. Because a lot of it just comes down to the skills that you teach people.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the things that have happened and been perpetuated generation by generation are just because it's people that have no skills trying to teach younger people skills that they don't have. They just don't have the skills to teach them. And so it's about bringing awareness and being like, look, if you have an emotion, it's important that you name it.
Yeah.
And it's important that you figure out how to deal with it, how to regulate. And then, and I think that that's a really big or really useful tool to kind of combat a lot of the gender toxicity that's out there. Because I don't think that boys should be non-emotional, and I don't think girls should be emotional. I think that everybody is equally emotional, and it's just perpetuated patterns that have led to boys being stunted or men being stunted at their creativity and their emotions. So anyways, I can go on and on about that, but
no, I love it. And honestly, I think you brought up a really good point, right? It's like that careful balance of focusing on your own personal experience, because at the end of the day, no one can tell you that's wrong, right? but there is wisdom in that, and I think it is important to call out, like and it's one of those things where, like, as individuals, I know I've encountered this with some of the, just general kind of writing topics that I've covered in my articles, but it's like when I'm sitting there trying to tell people about something, like related to writing, for example, there's always that voice in my head that's like, who are you? Like, what do you have? What ground do you have to stand on to tell anybody how to do anything, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, to an extent, yes, that's something to consider, but it's like you said, like, like, focus on sort of your personal experience, because that is unique and there is wisdom in that. And so I totally agree.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. That's the frame that I'm approaching it. And I'm really excited about it because I think it'll help people. It'll help me,
Yeah.
in processing these things. So yeah, I'm passionate about it for sure.
Yeah, I think what you'll find is that once you start kind of putting out this kind of content and people start reading it and kind of reacting and commenting, it's going to be one of those things where there's going to be so many people who resonate with it, who've had similar experiences and stuff like that. And so every time I see that happening, it's a reminder of how important it is to just put it out there, right? Because it is going to help people, like you said.
Yeah, because ultimately, by me doing this, that is me practicing vulnerability.
Right.
This is in practice. This is how you're vulnerable, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. But it's important.
But
it's really important.
It's important, exactly, and that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. All right. Well, let's switch over to your fiction side of things. Want to talk a little bit about what you've got going on in 2026 here, some of the projects. I know you mentioned your novel. So yeah, kind of give us an overview of what's happening on the fiction side of things.
Yeah, so I've been working on my novel for 3 years now, and a lot of that's been on the world building side. I'm about 75% of the way through the first draft, and I'm still at a point where it's not ready to really discuss in the open. It's still a lot of it's in the discovery phase,
Okay.
and it's not that I'm not interested in talking about it. It's that it's just still forming,
Okay.
So it's hard to describe something that is in process. The things that I can say about it to describe it are that it's it's actually female character driven. It's based off of an ascetic society that is very rigid, and there's a lot of disruption of that
Mm-hmm.
by the main characters. There is a really broad, sweeping, mythical theme that is slowly revealed throughout it, and then the big reveal is kind of at the end. I spent a lot of time developing the mythology for this, the cosmology for it, and that's truly what I'm very, very passionate about, and what I'm hoping is really kind of communicated through it. So that's probably the best that I can describe about the novel.
Sure.
There's a lot of political intrigue and betrayal, and a lot of, I think, major themes that are discussed are things like trust, hope is a big theme, and redemption, and basically how you can move past really major mistakes and still um, find good in what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's probably the best way that I can describe the book in the state that it's in right now. I would like to see it as a series. I have a rough outline for the second book of the series,
Okay.
and a even the third book. But the first one is turning out to be such a bear of a project that
Yeah.
I'm not even thinking about. I just want this to be done.
Sure.
So that probably won't come anywhere close to being ready, probably for the next year or more.
That's fair. Yeah.
At this rate. But other projects that are going to be more, easier to produce in my mind, at least, is I'm going to continue to release parts to The Shift,
Mm-hmm.
which, shout out to you, was the first time I'd done a prompt.
Yeah.
And it was because of Javier that pointed me to you.
Mm.
And it was a first indulgences prompt.
Mm-hmm.
And it's without a doubt the most popular thing that I have on my Substack. And it's because you set up such an amazing like structure for it that I was
Yeah.
like, I mean, it basically wrote itself, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But it's been a great exercise in like seeing where I can take it.
Yeah.
And it's been a lot of fun, and I can actually see it turning into a novel on its own at some point. So I am very excited about that.
Yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely. I was going to say the shift. If I recall correctly, it was the first indulgence prompt. I believe it was the one where it takes place 24 hours after the world has ended. Right?
yep,
It was
yep,
that prompt. Yeah, yeah,
yep,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so
Okay.
it was post apocalypse.
Yeah.
It was aliens, and there was a theme of there had to be some hope at
Right.
the end,
Yeah.
and I thought that was perfect. Like that just like hit, like that was just like spot on and like what I love to write.
Right.
Uh, and so I was like, that's it, that's the one.
That's so cool. Yeah. I
Yeah,
was just looking. You have, I think, 8 parts. It looks like so far for the shift.
so
Right?
far, yeah, yeah.
Do you have an idea of how many parts it'll be in total? You just kind of going with the flow.
No idea. The thing that it's involved into is I literally sit down the day before, so Tuesday, and plan out what I'm going to write to a certain degree, and then Wednesday I write it and then release it either on Wednesday or Thursday. So I actually don't have any plotting
Mm.
for the future. Um, so it's turned into an experiment. It wasn't my intention, but my focus was so exclusively on my book that I was like, okay, I do want to continue writing the shift,
Yeah.
but I focused on my book, and then it was like, oh shoot, it's Tuesday, I've got to write the shift. But it's turned into kind of a fun thing where I'm just like, what can I come up with? Where does it go next? Um, I've gotten a lot of like great feedback from my sister, who's a great support and inspiration in my writing right now,
Hmm.
as well as other people that you've had on the show, like Tamsin, and a number of other people that I'm a part of a writing group with,
Yeah.
which you are a part of as well.
Hmm.
Is has been great to kind of see where it goes. I think that what I do have seen, what I have moving forward is that it is very quickly going to be beyond Earth.
Mm.
I think that without giving too many spoilers away, Earth is the focus for the first eight parts.
Okay.
Things change fundamentally after that, and that's going to be starting to happen over the next couple parts. So, I would say that if that's of interest to you, especially if you're like, oh, deep space or that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, not saying that that's what's going to happen, but just the actual outer space elements, then that's kind of what's going to be happening next. Um, so I do have ideas. I just don't have an entire plot drawn out.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Yeah. And if I understand correctly, are you doing new parts every week? Is it a weekly series or
It's every other week.
every other week? Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay, cool. Nice, nice. Yeah, I'm really excited to see where that's going to go. I love that it started with the prompt, and I love,
Yeah.
you know, I was wondering, are you typically someone who tries to plot things out, or yeah, okay. So this is kind of, as you said, an
Absolutely.
experiment, and like sort of like being a pantser, if you will.
This is a very uncomfortable experience for me, but it's a good learning experience because I am a plotter, and I am trying to develop pantser abilities, if that makes sense. I'm trying
Sure.
to expand,
Yeah.
my toolbox.
Yeah, I've always, as time has gone on, I've found that a balance of the two is nice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
think you
like
called it a planter, which I
a
really like.
planter. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yep, yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
A combination of the two. Yep, yep.
Yeah.
All right, Alex. Well, yeah. So this last question I ask every writer that comes onto the show here. Looking back on your creative journey thus far, I would love to know what is some advice that you would give to a fellow writer who's just starting out. Maybe they've just joined Substack. What's something you wish you had known from the beginning?
Yeah, great question. It's something that Javier actually gave me. It's the same advice that he gave me, and that's support.
Mm.
Engage, support, and you'll be amazed at what can happen after that. Because we want people that do the same thing. We
Yeah.
we all want people that engage with our work. We all want people that help inspire us, push us. We all want friends with similar interests. We all want community, right? Those are
Mm-hmm.
all things that we all want as
Yeah,
writers. And so just do what you would want done to you. The
gotcha.
golden rule, you know.
Right.
So engage, comment, read, share, send DMs saying like, "Hey, I loved this." If you don't feel comfortable commenting it, like just give feedback and participate. It's really easy to feel uncomfortable doing that, and I want to acknowledge that
Yeah.
because I very recently went through that. But I don't think that you'll find a single person that won't be uh, blown away at you commenting or asking questions or um, honestly asking for advice. I asked Javier, I've asked you, I've asked a number of people for advice over the last couple of months. And in turn, I've been providing advice for other people. And it's just, I don't know, that's how you kind of keep what we have going on Substack going.
Mm.
And that's what helped me. And I'm pretty sure it's what's going to help people for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that so much. It makes me think of when I first joined Substack. One of my very first articles was kind of a mini challenge where I showed examples of people in the community doing exactly what you were saying, commenting, leaving feedback, just supporting their fellow writers. And so I said, okay, like here's a challenge for all of you. Find a new story or poem or a new writer once per day and just say something nice about it, like it, comment, share. And that was the beginning of this whole vision for what we've got now, right?
I love that. That's awesome. I didn't know the origin story. That's super cool.
Yeah. It was like it was this thing where I was going through, and in that article I created a collage of different comments and notes that I had seen that were like examples of people doing just that, right? Like spreading positivity, encouraging other writers, stuff like that. And I said, okay, this is what it looks like. Now I'm challenging all of you to start doing it more. Do it every day. And it takes 5-10 minutes, whatever, and it will, like you said, it'll make an impact.
Yeah, and it helps you as well. The only other thing that I'd say is that also just to give yourself a break, that there are going to be busy seasons in life.
Yeah.
And there's some people on this platform that are just, they go above and beyond, and they have this space to be able to voraciously read stuff on Substack. There are others that don't. And I think that it's easy to, speaking from personal experience, to feel like, I should be doing more.
Right.
And I think that that's a good feeling to have because it pushes you to do more, to engage more. But at the same time, I feel like whoever comes to Substack should be welcome, regardless of the level of engagement that they do. It's just if you want to be, directly involved in it, this is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's anybody that's like counting, like, oh, they only commented on this or that or whatever. Because I think everybody's coming from the same place of, we want people to feel encouraged. When I have time and space to do that, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And we just kind of keep that pattern going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do what you can with the time that you have available. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like you said, no one's counting, right? It's the thought, the thought behind it. It's the effort that matters. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I may not be counting other people, but I am counting. I'm like, okay, it's been a while. I need to go back and like do a bunch because I need to that's like my style of doing things.
Yeah, no, for sure. For me, I've created, I guess you could say, like a routine that's built into my schedule with the podcast here because I'm always doing like, weekly shout outs and whatnot. So that kind of creates a built-in routine for me to read stuff. But I also agree with you. There's definitely times where I'm like thinking to myself, I haven't really shared anybody's work in a day or two. I need to get in there and, start, helping people out. Well, thank you so much, my friend, for coming on the show here. This was an absolutely amazing interview. I'm so excited about what you're doing, not only in the fiction side of things, but the nonfiction, the vulnerability, just diving deep into these important topics. I'm so excited, and I can't wait for people to kind of latch onto that and discover what you're doing. So yeah, I just really appreciate you coming on the show, and thank you again for your time. This was an amazing interview.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been amazing. Love you, Bradley.
Love you too.
All right, cool.
All right, and a huge thank you to A.M. Bowman again for being on the show this week. A fantastic interview with some really wonderful insights. All right, now it's time for next week on Substack. This coming week will bring Chapter 9 of The Order of the Pawn, and I know that's sooner than most people expected, but that's because I'm actually taking a small break after this next chapter. You see, there's an event coming up, you may have heard of it, called Flash Fiction February, where I'll once more be offering daily prompts, weekly recaps, and some prizes for the top ranking stories. As a result, I'm going to shift focus to prepare for that. So, after this next chapter, the Devine series will take a break until March, at which point we'll dive back in for the second half of this first story arc about the Rot. I do plan to do some standalone Devine tales during the break, though, so you won't be completely without those stories if you're a Devine fan yourself. Other than that, next week will be our usual mix of spontaneous posts, our power-up prompt tomorrow, and of course our Mindful Monday checkpoint, alongside our weekly threads in my subscriber chat. And that's all I've got for you this week, my friends. But thank you for being here as always, and for sticking with me for this episode's slight delay. I hope you all have a safe and productive week of writing. This is Bradley Ramsey, signing off. Ah, here they are. The plans for Chapter 9. Let's see if this writer is telling the truth. Okay. So far, so good. Wait! What is this? A poll at the end of Chapter 9? The readers have to make a choice? I knew that writer was up to something. Well, time to give him a taste of his own medicine. Ha-ha! Let's see how he likes this third option. Hey, Finton, you in there? What? No, yes, but I was just leaving. Is everything okay? Yes, of course. Why wouldn't it be? Okay, I'll see you later then. Yes, of course. As you humans say, see you later, alligator. Finton, no one says that. Ah, yes, very good. Well, goodbye then. Man, he's being weird. Well, at least he doesn't hate me anymore.